My husband laughed when I walked into that courtroom alone. Not a small laugh, not the kind you swallow or hide behind your hand. He laughed openly, leaning over to whisper something to his attorney, and then his attorney laughed too. I heard it from across the aisle. Everyone in the gallery heard it. A few of them smiled. One woman in the third row shook her head slowly, like she felt sorry for me. I was 31 years old, standing in a federal courthouse in Chicago in a blazer I bought on clearance at TJ Maxx, holding a manila folder I'd organized myself over 4 months of late nights at the kitchen table of my sister's apartment. And the man I'd spent 6 years of my life building a future with thought the whole thing was funny. I didn't look at him. I set my folder down, pulled out the chair and sat. That was the moment I had been preparing for since the night he changed the locks. His name is Kevin. We met in 2018 at a work happy hour downtown. He was in commercial real estate. I was a paralegal at a mid-sized litigation firm. He was charming in that easy, low-effort way that some men are, the kind where you don't realize until much later that the charm was never really about you. It was just something he wore, like a good watch. We got married in 2021. Small ceremony, backyard of his parents' house in Naperville. I wore my grandmother's earrings. My mum cried 3 times. My younger sister Addie was my maid of honor and gave a toast that made everyone laugh and then cry. And I remember thinking, standing there in the grass with my heels sinking into the soft ground, that I had never been happier in my life. I was wrong, but I didn't know that yet. The first 2 years were good, or they seemed good. Kevin's real estate business was growing, and I had moved up at the firm to a senior paralegal position working directly under a partner named Mr. Tears Ellison, who was one of those old-school litigators who actually taught you things if you paid attention. I paid attention. I built cases, organized discovery, filed motions, prepared depositions. I was good at it. Kevin used to joke that I was basically a lawyer without the degree, and I'd laugh and he'd laugh, and neither of us took it seriously. I took it seriously. I always had, I just didn't say it out loud. The problems started slowly, the way they always do. He started traveling more for work, then more than more. Then there were nights I'd fall asleep on the couch waiting for him and wake up at 2 a.m. to an empty apartment. He'd call in the morning, apologetic, explaining. Late dinner with a client, traffic, he crashed at the office. I believed him the first dozen times. After that I told myself I believed him, which is different. I found out about her the way women usually find out, not dramatically, not with a confrontation or a confession or a tear-stained letter. I found a receipt, dinner for 2 at Monteverde, the kind of place you make reservations a month in advance. It was the same weekend he told me he was in Cincinnati for a deal. I didn't say anything, not right away. I went to work the next morning and sat at my desk and did my job and went home and made dinner. And Kevin came home and ate it and asked about my day, and I said fine and he said good, and that was that. But something shifted in me that night. Something very quiet and very cold settled into place. I started paying attention differently. I started noticing things I'd been too comfortable to notice before. The way the money in our joint account would dip on weekends when Kevin said he was working. The way he'd put his phone face down on the counter every single time. The way he sometimes looked at me across the dinner table like he was calculating something. I didn't confront him. I documented. I don't know exactly when I decided that's what I was going to do. It wasn't a decision so much as an instinct, the same instinct that made me good at my job. You don't win a case by reacting. You win by building, piece by piece, quietly, until the other side doesn't know what's coming. I opened my own bank account at a different institution. I started moving small amounts each paycheck, nothing dramatic, nothing he'd notice. I made copies of tax returns, joint account statements, the mortgage documents on the townhouse we'd bought together in Wicker Park in 2022. I photographed the contents of the filing cabinet in the office he kept locked, the one time he forgot to lock it. I wrote everything down in a small notebook I kept in my desk drawer at work. Then in March of last year, Kevin came home on a Tuesday evening, sat down across from me at the kitchen table and told me he wanted a divorce. He was very calm about it. He said he hadn't been happy for a long time. He said we'd grown apart. He said he hoped we could do this amicably. He used that word, amicably. I looked at him. I said okay. He seemed surprised that I wasn't crying. Maybe he expected me to beg. I don't know. I didn't beg. I asked if we could have a few days before involving attorneys, and he said sure. And he went to sleep in the guest room, and I went to the bathroom and sat on the floor of the shower for a very long time. I let myself feel it that night. All of it. I cried until I couldn't anymore, and then I just sat there. And then I got up and I dried off and I went back to my notebook. 2 weeks later, I came home from work to find my things in garbage bags by the front door. Not suitcases, not boxes, trash bags. The big black kind, stuffed with my clothes, my books, the framed photos from my nightstand. My running shoes were tied together by the laces and hanging off the door handle like a bad joke. Kevin was standing in the doorway of the living room with his arms crossed. He said, "The movers are coming Friday for the bigger stuff. You should probably make other arrangements." I said, "This is my house too." He said, "My attorney says otherwise." His attorney? He'd already hired one. He'd had one hired probably before he ever sat down across from me at that table. The whole amicably speech was a performance. He'd been planning this. I picked up 2 of the bags. I calls Addie from the driveway. She picked me up without asking a single question, drove me to her apartment in Lincoln Square, put sheets on the pull-out couch, and handed me a glass of wine. We sat in her kitchen until midnight while I told her everything. She didn't say "I told you so," even though she'd never fully trusted him and I knew it. She just listened. And then she said, "What are you going to do?" I said, "I'm going to need the kitchen table." I could not afford a divorce attorney. Not a real one. Not the kind Kevin had. I looked him up, his attorney, a partner at a downtown firm whose hourly rate was posted on his website and was more than my monthly car payment. I was a paralegal, not a lawyer. I had savings, but not that kind of savings. And I knew that even if I maxed out every option I had, I'd be outspent in the first 30 days. But here's the thing about being a paralegal for 7 years, specifically in civil litigation, specifically under a partner who treated every case like a federal matter regardless of the stakes. I knew how to build a case. I researched Illinois divorce law until I could recite the relevant statutes from memory. I learned the difference between marital and non-marital property in this state. I understood the concept of dissipation, the legal term for when one spouse wastes marital assets during the breakdown of a marriage. I filed my appearance with the court myself. I served Kevin's attorney with my own discovery requests, properly formatted, citing the correct rules of civil procedure. Kevin's attorney called me the first time to, I think, feel me out. Maybe intimidate me a little. He was polite, but there was something underneath the politeness, a kind of amusement, the way you might be amused by a child who insists they can carry something too heavy for them. He said something about the complexity of the case and suggested I might want to reconsider representing myself. I thanked him for his concern and asked him to respond to my written discovery within 30 days as required by statute. There was a pause. Then he said he would. Kevin had moved her in within 3 weeks of my leaving, a woman named, and I want to be careful here because she's a real person even if she made choices that affected my life. I'll call her his girlfriend. She was 26. She'd been working at his brokerage. I knew this because I'd been paying attention for longer than either of them realized. I documented the dissipation, the dinners, the weekend trips, the hotel stays that overlapped with dates he'd claimed on our joint tax return to be business expenses. I pulled credit card statements I had legal access to as a joint account holder. I calculated conservatively that over 18 months he had spent approximately $40,000 of marital assets on the affair. I also found something else. It took me longer to understand it than to find it, because it wasn't obvious. It was in the business formation documents. Kevin had restructured his real estate LLC twice in the 2 years before filing for divorce, in ways that appeared designed to undervalue his ownership stake. The business looked, on paper, like it was worth considerably less than it had been 18 months prior, which would matter enormously when it came to dividing assets. I called my old mentor, Mr. Ellison, not as an attorney, but as someone I trusted. I explained what I'd found. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "You need to subpoena those LLC records." I said, "I know." He laughed. It was a warm laugh, not at me, with me. He said, "You've been doing this job for 7 years and you never wanted to go to law school." I said, "I thought about it." He said, "Think about it again after this is over." I subpoenaed the LLC records. Kevin's attorney objected. I filed a response to the objection. The judge overruled it. The records came in. What I found in them was not subtle once you knew what you were looking at. Kevin had transferred ownership interests in 3 properties to a business partner, a guy named Mr. Mister Whitfield, his college friend who he golfed with every other Saturday, at values significantly below fair market. Properties that had appreciated substantially in the past 2 years. Properties that, if properly valued, would have increased Kevin's share of marital assets by somewhere between $300,000 and $450,000. I had an appraiser I found through the county assessor's public database evaluate 2 of the properties. I paid for it with money from my separate account. The appraisals came in exactly where I expected. The night before the hearing, I sat at Addie's kitchen table and I organized everything into 3 binders, color-coded tabs, a summary page at the front of each section. I practiced my arguments out loud in her living room, her sitting on the couch with her arms crossed pretending to be a skeptical judge, asking me questions I might not expect. She was good at it. She's always been sharper than people give her credit for. I didn't sleep much. I made coffee at 5 in the morning and sat by the window and watched it get light outside. And I thought about the garbage bags by the front door. And I thought about the receipt from Monteverde. And I thought about Kevin sitting across from me at our kitchen table, saying the word amicably, while he had already hired an attorney and already made his plans. And I thought about 6 years and what I had put into those years. And I let all of it become still inside me, still and cold and very, very clear. The courtroom in the Daily Center was smaller than I expected. The gallery had maybe 15 people in it, other attorneys waiting for their cases, a couple of people I didn't recognize, and in the second row, Kevin's parents. His mother looked at me when I walked in. His father looked at the floor. Kevin was already seated at the respondent's table, his attorney beside him in a suit that cost more than my rent. They were talking quietly. Kevin glanced over when I came in, and for just a moment, just 1 second, something moved across his face that wasn't amusement. Then his attorney said something to him and he smiled and they both looked away. I set my binders on the petitioner's table. I uncapped my pen. I put my notes in order. I did not look at him again. The judge was a woman in her late 50s named Judge Carver, and she came in without ceremony and sat down and put her glasses on and looked at both tables, and her expression did not give anything away. Kevin's attorney went first. He was smooth and practiced, and he laid out Kevin's position the way you'd expect. The business interests had been legitimately restructured. The marital estate was clearly defined. The assets had been properly disclosed. He was confident. He kept the confident tone of a man who has done this 100 times and knows how it ends. Then it was my turn. I stood up. I said, "Your Honor, I'd like to begin with Exhibit A." I slid 3 copies across to the clerk, 1 for the judge, 1 for opposing counsel, 1 for my record. Kevin's attorney took his copy and looked at it, and I watched the confidence shift slightly. Not disappear, just shift. Exhibit A was the LLC transfer documents compared side by side with the independent appraisals. I walked the judge through it the way I'd walked through hundreds of exhibits for Mr. Ellison over 7 years. Clearly, without rushing, 1 fact at a time. Kevin's attorney objected 3 times. I responded to each objection with the relevant rule or case law. Judge Carver sustained 1 of them, overruled 2, and at some point I noticed she had stopped looking at Kevin's attorney when he spoke, and was looking instead at my exhibits. We broke at noon. In the hallway, Kevin found me by the elevator. He said, "This is embarrassing. You should have just taken the settlement offer." I said, "What settlement offer?" He stared at me. He had sent a settlement offer through his attorney in October. I had received it. I had read it very carefully. It had offered me 30% of the liquid marital assets, none of the property, and a waiver of any claim against the business interests. I had declined it also through proper channels with a written response, citing my reasons. I said, "The one where you offered me 30 cents on every dollar I'm legally entitled to." He said, "You can't win this." I looked at him. The man I had loved, The man I had cooked dinner for and built a life with and trusted past, the point where trust made sense. He was still handsome. He was still wearing the kind of watch that catches the light. His eyes were the same as they always had been. I said, "I'll see you in there." The afternoon session was where it turned. I introduced Exhibit D, the credit card records, the hotel stays, the restaurant charges, dates and amounts, mapped against Kevin's sworn asset disclosure where those same amounts appeared as business expenses. Dissipation of marital assets. $41,200. Approximate. Conservative. Documented. I said, "Your Honor, under Illinois Statute 75-4H52-D2, the court may consider dissipation of marital assets by either spouse. The petitioner submits that the respondent engaged in a sustained pattern of misappropriation of joint funds for personal use unrelated to the marriage during a period when the marriage was undergoing an irretrievable breakdown." I heard Kevin's attorney mutter something. I heard Kevin shift in his chair. Judge Carver looked at the exhibit. She looked at Kevin. She looked at Kevin's attorney. She said, "Counsel, does your client dispute the authenticity of these records?" Kevin's attorney said they would need time to review. Judge Carver said, "You've had them since the discovery responses were filed 3 weeks ago." There was a silence. I stood there and let the silence be what it was. The judge recessed to review the documents. We sat in the hallway for 40 minutes. Kevin sat 10 feet away from me, not speaking. His attorney was on his phone. At some point, Kevin's mother came out and sat next to him and put her hand over his, and he stared at the floor. When we went back in, Judge Carver had more questions. Good questions. Specific questions about the property transfers, about the appraisals, about the timeline of the LLC restructuring relative to the date Kevin first consulted a divorce attorney, a date I had established through a subpoena of his attorney's engagement letter, which is a matter of public record in Illinois if you know how to request it. Kevin had consulted his attorney 14 months before he sat across from me at our kitchen table and said the word amicably. Judge Carver looked at him for a moment after I presented that. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The final ruling didn't come that day, it rarely does. But Judge Carver issued interim orders that froze the LLC assets pending a complete forensic accounting, ordered production of Mr. Whitfield's business records as a third party, and set a schedule for supplemental briefing. Kevin's attorney, when we were filing out, stopped next to me in the aisle. He said, "I have to ask, are you an attorney?" I said no. He looked at me for a moment. Then he said, "You should be." The forensic accounting took 3 months. What it found confirmed everything I had documented and then some. The final judgment came down in February. I was awarded 58% of the total marital estate, including the Wicker Park townhouse, which I subsequently sold. Kevin was ordered to pay back the dissipated assets with interest, which reduced his share further. The LLC restructuring was unwound for purposes of calculating his business interest, and Mr. Whitfield was less than pleased about the scrutiny, I'm told. The settlement check, after everything, was more than I had ever had in my life, more than I had thought was possible when I was sitting on the floor of Addie's shower at midnight thinking about garbage bags. I started law school in the fall, evening program at Loyola. I work full-time during the day, still at the firm. Mr. Ellison told the partners about what I'd done, which I hadn't asked him to do, but I didn't ask him to stop either. It is hard, harder than I expected, which is saying something, because I expected hard. I come home most nights too tired to do much besides make tea and review flashcards, and sometimes I think about how much simpler it would have been to just take the settlement offer and be done with it. And then I think about Kevin laughing when I walked into that courtroom, and his attorney laughing, and that woman in the gallery shaking her head. And I open my textbook. There's a thing I learned from 7 years of watching Mr. Ellison work cases that seemed unwinnable. He used to say it so often it became something of a running joke in the office, but he meant it completely. He'd say the other side's confidence is information, use it. Kevin was so confident he didn't prepare for me. His attorney was so confident he didn't take my discovery request seriously until it was too late. They both looked at me in that courtroom and saw someone who couldn't afford a lawyer, someone who didn't understand how the world worked, someone who didn't understand how the world worked, someone holding a clearance blazer and a manila folder. They were right that I couldn't afford a lawyer. They were wrong about everything else. I still have that manila folder. It's in a box in the closet of the apartment I rent now, a 2-bedroom in Andersonville that gets good light in the mornings. Addie comes over for dinner on Sundays. My mum calls every Tuesday and asks about school, and I tell her it's going fine, and she says I know it is in the way she does when she's proud, but doesn't want to push it. I keep the folder because sometimes you need a reminder of what you built when you had nothing but time and knowledge, and the absolute refusal to be underestimated. I plan to pass the bar in 2027. I plan to practice family law. I already know exactly who my clients will be. People sitting at someone else's kitchen table with their things in garbage bags and a voice in their head saying, "You can't win this." I'm going to hand them a folder, and I'm going to show them how to build. I've thought a lot about what actually happened in that courtroom. Not the legal part, but the human part. Kevin laughed because he genuinely believed there was nothing to be afraid of. His attorney dismissed my discovery requests because, in his experience, people without law degrees don't know what they're doing. And for a long time, that's probably been true enough to become an assumption they stopped questioning. That assumption is what lost them the case. There's something I've come to believe pretty firmly after going through all of this. How you treat people when you think you have the upper hand reveals exactly who you are, and it also almost always determines what happens next. Kevin spent 14 months planning behind my back while smiling across our dinner table. He moved his assets, restructured his business, hired an attorney, all while using the word amicably to my face. That's not just dishonesty. That's a particular kind of carelessness, the kind that comes from believing the other person will simply absorb whatever you hand them and walk away quietly. I didn't walk away quietly. But I also didn't react. That's the part I'm most proud of. Honestly, not the binders, not the subpoenas, not the forensic accounting. The part I'm most proud of is that I sat with what I knew for months, and I built instead of broke, because breaking would have felt good in the short term and cost me everything in the long term. Addie used to say when we were kids that I was the most patient person she'd ever met, and she didn't mean it entirely as a compliment. She meant I was slow to act, slow to react, sometimes frustratingly so. But patience isn't the same thing as passivity, and I think that's a distinction a lot of people miss. I wasn't passive during those months at her kitchen table. I was working, quietly, methodically, without anyone watching. The work was real even when no one could see it. Mr. Ellison told me once, years before any of this, that the most dangerous person in a courtroom is the one the other side has already decided to underestimate. I didn't fully understand what he meant until I was living it. When Kevin's attorney looked at me and saw someone who couldn't afford a lawyer, he stopped paying attention. And the moment someone stops paying attention is exactly when you do your best work. I'm not telling this story to celebrate what I took from Kevin. I'm telling it because I spend a long time believing that the system only works if you can afford to make it work for you. And I'm not naive. Money matters, access matters. It's harder without both. But knowledge is also access. Preparation is also power, and the refusal to accept someone else's version of what you're capable of, that might be the most powerful thing of all. I start my second year of law school in the fall. Some nights I'm exhausted in a way I didn't know was possible, and I sit at my kitchen table, my own table, in my own apartment, and I think about whether it's worth it. And then I remember sitting on the floor of Addie's shower in the dark, and I remember the garbage bags, and I open the textbook. It's always worth it. That part I know for certain.